Okay. And action. Okay. Welcome back to Tuesday Talks. We're on episode 8. That's crazy. And today we're going to talk about trauma and how it has shaped and created me throughout the years. Now, I do want to say, before we go any further, I am not a doctor, clearly. And so if you have gone through some trauma that you have not dealt with in a professional way, or are currently going through trauma, please seek help. I could not have made it through my traumatic experiences without the help of a therapist. And so please, 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 it is paramount to get the right type of help for whatever trauma you've gone through or are currently going through. So there's that. But as I ventured off into planning for this episode, there was a lot of tears because there's been a lot of trauma in different areas of my life. But this one in particular is foundational for me. It is what shaped every aspect of my life from childhood on. And so I am okay. I do want to say that. I have worked through a lot of this throughout my life. So as we talk through it, I don't want anyone to be worried about me. I have called in the right people, and I still continue to call in the right people when any of this comes back up. So let me lay that out there. So the first thing I want to do is define trauma itself, because that's my new favorite thing to do is to look up some of these definitions so that we can see what they truly are, so we can get a shared understanding and a shared level set before we dive off into it. So trauma, 1, it is damage that occurs as a result of a distressing event. So whatever that is, it doesn't have to be as in-depth as what I'm about to get into for myself, but whatever it is that causes a distressing event. But it is often the result of overwhelming stress that exceeds one's ability to cope or to integrate the emotions involved with that experience. And so I think a lot of times that's where the outcome of trauma comes into play for so many of us. For me, it was not so much the event itself, because I suppressed a lot of it, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. But as I was doing the research for this, I came across a statistic that said 75% of us will experience some sort of traumatic event. Now, that's varying degrees of trauma. And let me say this, hear me, focus right here. No one person's trauma is worse than another person's. I am so sick of that, and I will die on that hill of, oh yeah, you were this, well I was this. I have seen way too much of that in my life. Let's rewind to the friendship episode and talk about why that is not okay. No one person's trauma is any worse or less than another person's trauma. My trauma is my trauma. Your trauma is your trauma. And it should not define, your trauma should not define how I deal with or how much havoc mine has wreaked in my life. Nobody's trauma trumps anybody else's trauma. Leaving that one out there. But no matter the trauma, more often than not, it sets us on a path that we would have never chosen for ourselves. And so finding the right ways to unpack and work through that is what needs to happen, but a lot of times it's not what happens. A lot of times we just stuff it down, shove it in that suitcase as far as it'll go down, and put it in the back of the closet and just say it didn't happen. And so because of that, a lot of times we will find ourselves still responding in ways that are fueled by the fact that we never dealt with that. And so I saw when I was Googling the definition of trauma, the APA definition of trauma, something that popped up in the search bar was what caused me the most concern, and said, okay, I'm gonna have to navigate this episode in a different way. It was, how do I deal with trauma without therapy? So what that tells me is there's enough of a search out there for people trying to learn how to deal with trauma without therapy, which also means there's enough trauma out there. It comes in all shapes and sizes, and so it's out there. But the fact that people are trying to find a way to do it without therapy is almost scary. And I get it. There's a stigma against therapy that we have got to break as a society. I've been in therapy since I was in my early 20s, mid 20s. And I'm almost 43. I'll be 43 in June. Go ahead and start buying presents now. I'll give you an Amazon wish list. Actually, Amazon gift cards. They're great. But my kids have both been in therapy for, well, let's see, my son for 5-6 years now. And my daughter for maybe 4-ish, 5, somewhere in there. So we have no stigma in this house on therapy. Not anymore. Not now, it's just the 3 of us. Like, we have no stigma on therapy and the benefits of therapy. It comes and goes in our lives. Right now, it is coming. Like, it is where we are. We live in a world of therapy because that's what they're trained to do. They're trained to help us unpack those suitcases and handle those individual components in the suitcase in a healthy way that helps us stay those functioning, members of life. And so we cannot pretend that we can do this on our own. And so the fact that when I looked that up, and that was one of the first things that popped up, I was like, seriously, this is what people are trying to do. So I'm just going to be real. I'm just going to be real with you guys today as to kind of what this one foundational trauma was for me, how it's kind of played out in my life, and what I've done aside from therapy, even though I will still wave the therapy flag all the live long day, and how I've kind of gotten to this point. So why do we feel that is? Why do we feel that's what people are looking for? I think it is because we have been taught as a society to just stuff and pretend what's going on is not really going on, because that's not for the masses. Like, I'm supposed to suppress my anger, I'm supposed to suppress my stress and my sadness, and that's all unacceptable. Sadness is unacceptable. When I meet you in the store and I'm like, oh my goodness, how are you? I don't want you to pour out how you really are. I want you to say, I'm fine, how are you? Kids are great, great, have a good day. That's what we really want when we say, how are you? We're not looking for someone. I was in the doctor's office a couple days ago, and I was sitting in the waiting room, and a lady walks in, and the receptionist, bless her heart, she's like, how are you today? And this woman just starts unloading. She just starts unloading it all. And that receptionist is back there going, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, this is not what we're really looking for. And so we've been trained to stuff the sadness, stuff the anger, stuff all the stuff, and not let my crazy out. And I use that term loosely. Psychologists say we're not supposed to use that term, but I'm just meaning all my bleh. That's not what we're really looking for. And so we've trained ourselves. I just gotta keep it in, gotta keep it together. Nobody's gotta know that there's really junk going on. So I'm gonna tell you what, for those of you that don't already know, what happened to me as a child. And so it's okay. I have dealt with the bulk of it and the fallout of it, and we're going to talk about that. When I was, my parents divorced. We know that they divorced when I was 2.5, 3-ish. Some of the why was my birth mother making poor choices. But it came to be so much more than that. The time my parents divorced, my birth mother, she remarried, but he was in the military, and so he was gone a lot. However, from about 7, 8, somewhere in there, until 10-ish, somewhere in there, she chose a life of sex and favors for money. And as part of that, as part of the lure, I was also involved as a child. And so I can remember that I had very vivid memories of things I was asked to do, things I willingly did, because I got to a place where in my mind the connection was, in order for a man to love you or for someone to love you, you offered sex, you had sex, you did all the things. And so my brain was immediately skewed as a child. And so I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know how I was supposed to feel about all of this. And it was all terrifying. And so I just kept it in. Nobody knew. I would come up and see my father during the summers, but I still didn't say anything. Because number one, that was my mother. Now, let me just lay something out here. She has since been diagnosed as bipolar. She's had a lot of issues. She has, she's come out of that life. I don't have a relationship with her. I will deal with that when the time comes, as she's getting older and sicker. But I haven't had a relationship with her since I was 13. And so I do still have a relationship with my stepfather who divorced her, and we still talk often. But I wasn't really sure what was real and what was childhood suppressing trauma. And so I decided to flip the script the day I knew I was going to start working through this. So because of that, though, I spent much of my teenage years in that same cycle. If someone's going to love me, I will give them sex. Like, that's how I'm going to get them to love me and do whatever crazy and astronomical things that they wanted, because it will make them love me. Now, nobody knew that was going on, because on the surface, I was 4.0, valedictorian, top of my class, like super smart, like all the things. And so nobody knew that suitcase was stuffed and shoved in the back of my closet, and they didn't need to know. But there came a point in my life where I knew I had to flip that script. I had to begin to unpack this. Nobody told me to do it. I just knew it on my own. I didn't want to be terrified of those feelings coming up anymore. I didn't want to be terrified of those memories that were coming to surface when I was in the middle of some random act with some person. Like, didn't want that for my life anymore. And so I knew I wanted to wake up and not feel the same about it all. So in order to do that, I started going to therapy. I started working to unpack. I started working with my mentor, who helped me get to a place to forgive my birth mother, to truly, truly forgive her. And I do to this day. I love her as my mother, and I forgive her for all of that. She truly does not remember any of it. She does not think any of it happened. So I have to forgive her. And some of you may be thinking, how in the world can you do that? If we step over into my believer parking lot for a moment, it's because I've been forgiven for so much of my life. And so how can I not? It's that grace constipation, that forgiveness constipation that we've talked about. Now, it took me a long time to get there. Do not hear me saying that because I have this relationship with Jesus that I just woke up and I'm just like, she's forgiven. No, ma'am. No, sir. There was a lot of digging that had to happen. I had to get to a place where I saw her as fallible, just like me. Now, I know that I've broken that cycle and I have flipped that script, because I do not do that to my two children. Like, I did not continue that lifestyle. So I chose to break that cycle. Like, that's step one. I knew I had to find ways to break that cycle. So my therapist, working with mentors, working with close friends, unpacking, being honest about all that. Because here's the deal. A lot of times, even if we're like, okay, let me pull that suitcase out and remember, I was sexually prostituted as a child. You remember this suitcase, is not the same as opening it up, pulling out and saying, you know what? this is not on me. This is on this person or on this situation. Like giving those things to who they need to go to. And it is sometimes also pulling that jacket out, putting that jacket on myself and letting it help me navigate the winters to come, because I had more trauma to come. And when we get into some of those episodes, you might be thinking, okay, that childhood sex stuff, that's nothing. But I put that coat on and I knew it was going to help navigate me through the winters to come. I got to the point where that suitcase was completely empty. Now, even until 2019, there were still some things coming up that I needed, but that suitcase is empty. 2019, so I was 41. This happened between 7, 8, and 10 to 11, somewhere in there. Like, that's a long time. But that didn't mean I just stayed in it. I dealt with it. I unpacked it. I placed those pieces in the right places that they needed to go and quit shouldering all of that on myself. So as I was preparing for this episode, I jotted down a few things of like trying to think back of what either my therapist, mentor, people in my life that were helping me navigate this. What are some things that helped me to flip that script and to break that cycle and keep it broken? Number one, coming to the realization that it takes time. Like I just said, that's a big chunk of time, 25, 30 years. It's a big chunk of time. But each step, things got better and easier to deal with. It takes time. You don't recover from trauma overnight. And for anyone to be like, get over it. Like, get over it. Listen, this has been going on long enough. Can't you just get over it? Your grief for whatever trauma that you've gone through is yours to bear and yours to walk however long it needs to walk. Dolly Parton, the Queen, she said on one of her movies here recently, she said, or had a phrase in there that said, grief is just love with no place to go. And I love that. So like, allow people to handle and walk in their grief. Like don't put a time limit on it. Does it get frustrating at times? Does it get frustrating to walk with someone and be like, oh my gosh, why are we still here? Absolutely. But understanding that their trauma and the grief that ensues because of it is theirs to walk through and you just to come alongside and hold those arms up. Like that's what that's for. And I luckily had people in my life willing to walk alongside me as I navigated mine. Number two, search for that support. Don't isolate. Even if you're not willing to go to a therapist, don't isolate. Don't sit in your dark room all night long and cry and then get up in the morning and put your happy face on and walk out and do your stuff. Like, don't isolate, because believer parking lot, if the enemy can get us to believe that we're the only ones walking this road and that we are all alone, then he's winning. But the second we begin to shed a little bit of light and say, somebody walk alongside me and help me bear this burden that we trust, it begins to diminish that power that this has over us. So lean out for that support. Do not isolate. That is the worst thing that we can do as we're coming out of trauma and walking the grief road. So there's that. Listen to our bodies. That was one of the things, like I found moments where the trying to put on the mask and not deal, and my body said, girl, you're done. Girl, you need to sit down and I'm going to take you out for a couple of days with whatever it was. And it was in those moments because I was just pushing through and trying to just trudge through it all. Sometimes I just got to stop. Sometimes I got to stop and not think about it. Sometimes I just need to, you know what? Okay, it's fine. Like we're going to put the suitcase not in the closet. We're just going to put it outside the door for a minute because mama has got to recover for a minute. Listen to my body. Like I had to listen to my body. Another thing I did was focus on getting into some sort of routine. So as I was trying to navigate coming out of the trauma and dealing with the ensuing grief, was I really worked on some sort of routine to give myself ear markers throughout the day to focus on that I'm going to make it through this next day. So really working on a routine. Another thing I really worked on, another piece I really worked on was finding small things that I could fix. Okay, so one of the fallouts of this trauma and the other ensuing traumas throughout, that have come since, flew in the face of my control issues, and I really began to build some control issues, and we'll unpack that on a whole nother episode. But for this purpose, I had to find small things that I could fix that would make me go, you know what? It's okay. Okay, I did that. Whether it was something in the kitchen, like it didn't have to be anything groundbreaking and earth-shattering. Just finding those small pieces that I could fix what I can. And it gave me that gumption and to be able to continue to move forward with how am I going to navigate this grief. It sounds weird, but looking back, those were big pieces for me. And then this was probably the most heart-changing for me, coming out of that trauma, navigating the grief, was a lot of times when we're walking through grief, we just want to just stay in this little bitty teeny tiny isolation like I talked about, and sometimes we just gotta look up and we have got to see the beauty of things around us, whether that's my kids who are happy and healthy, whether it's the fact that I'm able to even walk. Like sometimes it's those, that count your blessings business. Like sometimes that is the real nitty gritty of what I've got to do. I've got to raise my eyes for just a second and look at what is good around me in those small moments of my world, so that I don't allow myself to be drowned by the trauma and the grief that is there. Queen Dolly, in one of her shows recently, one of the lines in the show that she had written was, "Grief is just love with nowhere to go." And so allowing myself to I didn't know that concept, that it stated that way until now, but allowing myself to understand as I walked this road, my grief is just, of this trauma, is just love with nowhere to go. That's it. And so using these components to help me find places to land that love was what was so important for me looking back now, and then using those same tools through navigating coming out of that trauma into the traumas that have happened since, even through my divorce. Like a lot of these concepts I had to pull through my divorce. It takes time, support, don't isolate, finding a routine, fixing what I can, and enjoying those small moments intentionally. I used them in my divorce too, and then with another situation that came out with my daughter shortly after, I had to do the same thing there, and that's a whole other episode, so we'll talk about that then. But we'll use these same concepts that I've learned. Anyway, bottom line is prioritize ourselves. As we're navigating out of trauma and walking that road, we've got to prioritize ourselves. I will still raise that flag of see a therapist. Big key component there. But prioritize ourselves. And that it can only, especially when we're the ones that walk through that trauma, that's the only way we can get through it, is to prioritize ourselves. And knowing that there's other people we've got to take care of, prioritizing ourselves is the only way we're going to be healthy and well for them in the long run. So that's what I've got for trauma. I know it was a lot. I know it was meaty. And but I'm not going to apologize for it, because that's what we're here for. That's what you're here for. You're here to help walk this road with me and hear as I unpack and talk through these things. So I hope you guys have a great week. Next week, episode 9, I've titled it "Blow Out the Pilot Light on Gaslighting and Narcissism." So that one's going to be fun. So I hope to see you guys back next week. Have a great week, and we'll talk then.